Montezano, welcome to Washington. I wish you brought some better weather with you.
Thank you very much.
It's a tremendous pleasure to have the president of BNDES with us today. And I think we're going to do a little bit of an exploration around how BNDES is involved, talk about the privatization, talk about infrastructure, and then talking about some of the international arena around that, picking up from some of the themes that Marcos has been talking about. And I think you're going to bring a unique perspective for the audience because of your time in BTG and commodities and the work you've done in the private sector, then the privatization, and what will probably seem like quite a whirlwind last few months in impact as president at BNDES. So welcome and thank you for joining us. Let's kick off.
Yes.
BNDES has had quite an interesting history. Can you just let's start with history a little and talk about how have you seen the role of BNDES in the past? How's it evolving? What's the vision of the future?
Yeah, good morning all. Thanks for the invitation. Yeah. Thanks Alexandre and all for the invitation here for the chamber. BNDES has quite a unique history and it's a very beautiful history, I would say.
Yeah.
And it's, since its foundation 67 years ago, after the Second War, the bank has played a protagonist role in different cycles of our economy. It started building the country, literally, the infrastructure, building roads, building cities. And then the second phase was the industrialization of the country, building factories. And the late 90s was a key agent on the privatization, on the first big wave of privatization in Brazil that you all remember here. And then on the last, let's say, 15 years, the bank has focused on to be this lending machine on subsidized loans, making a huge transfer of financial value of money from the government, from the population to the borrowers. And now, I mean, in this shift of our economic strategy, as Marcos and Alexandre mentioned here, I'm quite sure that BNDES will play a critical role. And having an institution such as BNDES is a gift for a country. And we as a country should enjoy that. And our job now is repositioning the bank along as the shift in the strategy, moving out from being this subsidized lending machine to still a lending machine, but at market rates. But together with the service capabilities, which is closer to what we did in the 90s, helping the government desestatizating its assets and concession, divesting, etc. And I think the bank is quite well equipped on, I would say, technical tools for that.
Yeah. So quite a transformation ahead.
Yeah.
Yes. Peeling the onion a little bit around that, I mean, I think we are all excited by the economic agenda and the diagnostic, as Alexandre has talked about, that's been laid out for Brazil and the path forward from Paulo Guedes and all the team. Can you talk a little bit about how you see the role of BNDES and the role it's going to play, particularly on the all-important privatization agenda, but what let's politely call the de-bureaucratization of Brazil, or decomplexification of the country. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. I prefer, I don't know the translation to English, but in Portuguese we say desestatização, because I think it encompasses a lot of different actions that at the end of the day is shrinking the size of the state. But I think the main role of the bank at this part of the strategy is acting as an investment bank for the Brazilian state in all levels. I mean, at the 90s, we focus on the federal level, and that's where we're starting now at the federal level. But when you look at the Brazilian destatization program, it's much bigger than only the federal. It's much, much bigger. And the more we dive on the state and municipality levels, in a similar path to what this country did many years ago. The potential of opportunities and financial amounts and deals is quite impressive.
Yeah.
And that's why I do think that the bank will be performing that not only for the government, but for a generation. And for me, it's more than a decade of work. And going into details about how we want to play this role, it's quite similar to a private investment bank, as you all know here quite well how to do that. We go to our client, we originate the deals, structure it, and sell. The sole difference here is that our client is not skilled on financial instrument, doesn't understand much about markets, doesn't have money to pay us, okay? Doesn't have time to structure the deals. It doesn't have the tools on his, I would say, office or his company to work along with us in this process. So we really need to take the client hand by hand and almost do the job for them. On the other hand, in this big shift of our cultural mindset being pro-capital, the origination willingness of the client is quite impressive. The more I visit governors, ministers, mayors, they want to do privatization. They just don't know how, and how can they do that? So the challenge we have as this bank is how to execute that, how to turn such big amount of opportunities and turn that into a constructive and efficient and I would say proper pipeline. And that's why we need to work alongside with the whole financial community. And we want to play a very neutral role there. We want to do the tough job of originating the deals with our clients. And being a federal SOE, we have quite an advantage for that because we are the government. We can navigate there over the wall. And our goal is to make the whole preparation, both in the client mindset and organizing the process. But at some point in time, we need partners. We need partners to digest such a big amount of opportunities. Multilateral banks, Brazilian banks, international banks, accountants, advisors, engineers, environmental specialists, traffic measures. The bank will be impossible for any institution alone to do such a job. So we want to be this intermediary where we originate. We bring the financial community to the table in an organized way, both in a process perspective, but also in a governance perspective. Because when you are dealing with government, it's a very delicate relationship. And again, forget, for instance, our ministers in Brazil, the infrastructure of São Paulo, because that's not Brazil. But when you go to a lower level, you have some governance risk there. And also, again, since the client doesn't understand so well what does that mean in financial terms, he needs some protection in order to price the deals, in order to understand the financial impacts and the consequence of the decisions they are taking. So having BNDES acting as this first layer on the process, I think it's critical and is an advantage for the whole market. And at the end of the line, Janie, we have our balance sheet where we can use the balance sheet in order to catalyze or to help some balance sheet allocators, either equity or credit, to complement the facilities. So we will participate both on the first mile and on the last mile, helping whatever is needed. And our goal is trying not to compete with anyone. So making the one that makes the wheel turn and just filling the blanks where it's needed.
That's a significant change. It's easy to say, but it's quite a revolution and a very welcome one. I want to pick up on one of the things you were talking about, because one of the priorities of your personal leadership in BNDES has been driving greater transparency in the process. You've been talking about governance. You've had the challenge of quite a lot of change in the leadership that you've brought through. Can you talk a little bit about how that's worked, how you're thinking about transparency? What are some of the other changes like that? Transparency
is more, I'd say, a technical word for what we mean. But we want to provoke this, I'd say, culture change of making a BNDES an open institution. And let me go back to this last 15 years of BNDES that we're discussing here. that it explains a lot the current culture. So imagine that you were heading this bank 15 years ago, and you had to lend 1 trillion reais at very subsidized lending, competing with private banks. So every entrepreneur, every executive in Brazil was lining in front of your door every day. So you just stay there, seated in Rio de Janeiro, trying to lend as much as we can, and avoiding competition from the private market, because to lend 1 trillion in an economy that's not performing so well, you need to compete with everyone, right? And that turns the bank into a kind of mechanical lending machine, closed mechanical lending machine. The bank closed itself. And when I say closed, it's in lato sensu, and transparency is a very important, I'd say, component of this transparency. If we want to move BNDES from this closed, introspective culture into a hub of business, we need to be open. People need to go to the bank. We need to speak with the market. We need to help the banks to get deals. So that's all about openness. And if you want to be open, you need to be transparent at first, right?
Yes.
And what I say, and doing my homework in the bank for the last 3 months about the past, and I did a lot of homework still doing about past things there. I learned a lot on what should be avoided. And one big lesson that I think it's clear for everyone is that transparency adds value for the institutional brand, because once we're transparent, you here, the market, is going to trade with us, and adds value to the executives because it protects us. And so once we're transparent with public money, we're being more protected about any misaction. Sometimes we commit fails, right? Yeah. As human beings. And transparent will tell us that when we commit fail, we're going to fail fast, right? But what I'm trying to set at the bank is transparent as a culture, not as an obligation, because of that. Because we're already obliged by law to be transparent. Brazilian regulation tells that, if you look at that. But again, the bank should want to do that because it adds value to its franchise and protect the executives. So it's a willingness to do, not an obligation. And I think that people understanding that little by little, it's like praying every day, praying, and people get there. But again, transparency is a big asset for this bank, and I think we're on the right side.
That's great. If we turn to the infrastructure arena, can you talk a little bit then, in light of your earlier comments, how are you seeing the evolution of infrastructure finance? So you've talked a little bit about filling in the gaps, but how, for example, funding some of the very large-scale projects in local currency, what are some of the different elements that you want to see and you want to have evolve?
I think the word there is syndication. I mean, is open our market for the syndication market. On one side, you had the BNDES as being the huge elephant competing. On the other side, you had only 4, maximum 5 banks. So it's a very closed market, I would say. So our challenge on this, again, this statization program is also desestatize the credit market. So we want to be the hub to help additional long-term lenders to come to Brazil. So either by plain vanilla syndication, where we do all our origination structure and then we syndicate, or with financial tools like guarantees or liquidity provisions or completion, mini-perm, whatever. So we can have more lenders tapping the deals at their preference points. So want to give a hard time to the Brazilian banks. Just a joke.
But not BTG though.
As well.
When we look around the world, just continue to peel the onion a bit on this, we've seen more institutions, more development banks trying to take a more surgical approach to addressing the specific risks in infrastructure. Can you talk a little bit more about where are the specific areas that you see BNDES critically playing for now? I mean, you talked a little bit about states and municipalities serving all of Brazil, but where are the different parts of the value chain that you will need to be playing a central role, and where are the areas that you don't?
I think the first big one is like development risk.
Yeah.
We should be able to develop the true project financing market in Brazil. And again, I think you have all the tools to do that. And when I mention syndication, the syndication will help address this as well.
Yeah.
Because one thing is that if you are the sole lender, 100% the lender, and you'll be more skeptical about any risk-taking decision. If you have 5, 6 other members in the same pool, and collectively they accept this risk, the bank and all the remaining participants, they will more flexible to take this risk. And that's why I think one thing is totally linked to the other.
Yeah.
But in essence, it's a construction development risk, you call, in different sectors.
And FX is, obviously always a major concern of the international investors coming in. How are you looking at tackling some of the FX risk to support the international flows as well?
Yeah, I mean, from an equity holder, an equity investor perspective, the best hedge for FX is BRL lending, right? Yeah. So the more we can, again, increase this market on the BRL lend, lower will be the risk for the investor on an equity perspective. For those that want to enjoy the lending market, in my personal view, if you're looking at 30 years, 20 years, it doesn't care so much. But I respect those that they are concerned about the short-term volatility of FX. On this sense, it's more Roberto Campos' central bank job. They are working on regulation so you can net the hedge of the infrastructure BRL to dollar, so we don't have a mismatch tax over lifetime of the deal. And then we can provide the hedge, but as of today, even hedging, if you have a mismatch on tax, at the end of the day, you are not truly hedged. Yeah. And what I'm saying to banks as well is that you can also borrow in BRL. Yeah. You can also borrow in BRL. I'll be glad to lend to international banks to do this pass-through. But to be honest, if you try to borrow in BRL, I think you'll be very well successful. Yeah. As Alexandre was saying here about this demanding at low interest rates. Yeah. And you're just back from London. I'm sure you've been talking to a lot of investors. How are you feeling the sentiment of them towards the investment agenda you've got? I did a trip to US 1 month ago, and my feeling there was more, I would say, they were attentions, they were like interest, but not so hot. But now this time in London, last 2 days, I found we're one step up, and everything there was 90% of the meetings discussing ESG. Yeah. 90% of the meetings. Yeah. And I think we as a bank will have the obligation to be the leading institution of these metrics in Brazil. And it's a global topic. And I mean, we as a country have all the gifts to play this role. Yeah, and an important one to have with facts on the table rather than some of the media noise, as it were, around it. You talked a bit about the states and municipalities and the criticality of covering all of Brazil. Can you talk a little bit more about the small and medium-sized enterprises and how you're thinking of getting more access to credit? The lower interest rates obviously help in the environment, but you're going to play a very critical role, and they're the lifeblood of the Brazilian economy to a large extent. So what are the plans there? Okay. Yeah, first, we see BNDES as it is a wholesale bank, right? Yeah. And until I'm there, I want to keep this way, because I think that being a wholesale bank, it keeps our neutrality, and I think neutrality is together with transparency is a key, unique asset for this bank, and we should preserve it, strategic-wise. On top of that, when you speak about SME lending, you need to be on the last mile. You need to be facing the client like we're here. You need to be understanding the client, even if you face the client digitally, right? But you need to be close. And as a public bank, if in the past BNDES had some intention, or still we have an old plan inside the bank that I'm keeping there off the records because I'm not using, is to become BNDES into a retail bank or growing inside the country. I'm totally against that. And we think that as a wholesale bank and having this long-term capital and the tech tools, digitalization tools, again, the same strategy of syndicating the infrastructure.
Yeah.
Our goal is to help building competition from the ground, like foreign banks come to Brazil, tech banks, cooperatives, traders, trying to have more people, agents accessing our rates, accessing our funding, in order to provide liquidity to the SME. I think that BNDES doing that directly will be very tough, and we have other priorities. So I'm stepping out of this for a moment. And when we speak about SME, Citi knows that quite well, it's all about the cost of the structure. Right?
Yeah.
It's, of course, you can price the full rate, but operating SME is a heavy business. So coming with our infrastructure, in both in funding and technology, that we have a lot of ready-to-be-used stuff, I think we can help provide competition in Brazil. But again, through an indirect on-lending strategy.
Yeah, so you keep the wholesale
Or
focus
keep the wholesale.
of the,
The bank had a project of moving, and a very aggressive project, by the way, that I found by moving to the direct lending that I'm holding off. I think we have a lot of challenges, and we're not going to do that very well. So holding off this strategy for now.
Oh, you've got such a central other role to play for the meantime. Get it done well.
You need to choose what not to do, right?
Yes, yes. That's, I think, music to everyone's ears. You've talked as well, a little bit about technology and digital and other pieces, and clearly not going down a retail path. But in the wholesale side, are you seeing that as an opportunity to make the institution more agile, get the approval processes and other things faster? Where do you see the opportunities or the threats?
First, I'm quite impressed with our own lending technology we have at BNDES. The retail banks in Brazil, they experience that. It's quite efficient already. I mean, we are today, if you take this SME indirect lending, I think we're the 6th largest retail bank in Brazil. I didn't know that, We don't speak that about much. That is already quite big. And the average ticket is around 100 to 300,000 reais. So it's quite capitalized already. And the technology is really, really efficient on this sense. But going to, let's say, helping the technology itself, our focus as a bank is not to develop the first, let's say, scientific tests. We want to take what's already proven and then implement that into large scale, right? And then a few examples where the bank is already doing that. Solar. We have a very active action on solar, and a plan to help small solar producers in Brazil. A second one is another example, converting trucks and buses from oil or diesel to gas. So those on the textile side, helping the factories to build this 4G platform on the textile industries. So we are kind of the one that promotes things that are already on track. The bank has a small initiative on, let's say, developing the first age of technology, but again, it's not our DNA. We're again on this wholesale financial animal. We're much better in learning what's already working and using that to multiply in the market. And a very important partner for that is our Secretary of Productivity, Carlos da Costa, and all the Sebrae Senai group. And the idea is that to work together. And again, we provide the technology, provide the money, and they do the last mile in the same structure. But the technology in Brazil is totally linked to the SME. We think that the biggest gain on technology evolution, or I would say technology implementation, is under small and medium-sized companies.
Which is terrific because they can help. If you can get that scaled up, then you've got a real boost into the economy. You just to finish up on this sort of theme, the infrastructure world around LATAM has not exactly been known as an agile and a fast process. And there's been a sea of unbankable projects around the world. What are the challenges you're facing in getting this to be more nimble and getting this to be a faster process? You've talked about some pieces of it, but where do you see the biggest challenges and where do you see the bigger opportunities in that?
Okay, it's a very good question. And I will pick a point that Marcos Troijo mentioned here, and I think it's the same point. I think we are not agile because we don't have a country plan. We have a government plan. We plan as a government. We plan 3 years. We plan 2 years. We plan 4 years. In infrastructure, we need to plan 40 years.
Yeah.
40 years. And then imagine that if you're thinking a very sophisticated and high-end project, and then one government goes to the left, and then the other goes to the right, and then it's always like a bumps movement, right?
Yeah.
And I think that if you think on 40 years, 30 years, and start creating pipelines of deals and a country plan, then you can fulfill a pipeline and things get fast. Because you cannot move a big vessel or train like shifting every moment. And I would say that I've been in the government for 9 months only, and my first experience.
I'm sure it feels longer.
Absolutely, absolutely. But I'm loving that. And then I'm quite surprised with the lack of these projects. We don't have such a big long-term planning capacity. And we Brazilians were very impatient, right? We want everything for tomorrow,
we hadn't noticed.
But sometimes when you speak about infrastructure, take the example of the 5 country rails that Marcos was mentioned here. It takes a 5-year planning at least. And impressed me, again, about how poor we are on this, again, macro global planning project for the country. And I think BNDES will play a key role here. Because again, we have money, we have skill, we have time, and we have independence. Again, the neutrality. So we want to be the motor, the machine, pushing up this project modeling, planning for the country. And let's take the gas example that we're discussing now in Brazil. On the 6th of November here, we have the big auction for the excess pre-salt. And it's in context of all this huge capacity of generating gas as well in Brazil. And we're going to have a problem in 2025 where we're going to generate more gas than we can consume as a country. And then there's a big discussion about should we re-inject the gas in the deep sea? Doesn't seem so smart, right? So let's build the pipeline to bring from the deep sea to the low sea all this gas and consume that. But again, where the pipeline will be located? Depending on the position, one company will benefit better than the other. Who operates the pipeline? What are the I would say, environmental risks on that? Because that's something quite, not new, but unique for the region. And then our government doesn't have time, doesn't have money. And we will invest our own money together with those private players in order to build this planning. It takes at least 24 months planning, at least 12 to start having some would say picture on the where to go. If you do that for rails, for oil, for airports, for water and treatment, then you start having a big portfolio of projects. And looking backwards, the last 20 years in Brazil, and BNDES was part of this, of course. We did a completely misallocation of capital. It was totally bad allocated. And getting closer to the action now, I think one of the reasons is, I would say, poor planning, because we want to rush. We want to start as soon as we can the construction. Let's be patient. Let's invest some money beforehand, and we're not spending money, it's really investment. We need to change our mind or shift our mindset. When you're investing in some project, we're not spending it, we're investing because we're saving a lot of money further. And then creating this pipeline, create these standards out of the government hands, ideally. The BNDES together with private players executing that. And then I think we can be more, can look more quick, as you said, because that's like credits, right? if you do credit as a lending, as a one-off, you'll be not efficient. But if you create this machine of planning a project, you start to be more efficient. But again, behind that, it requires a country planning. Right? Because if you do all this effort, and 4 years from now, it comes a new person there, a new party, and just throw away everything we did, we'll never do. That's why planning and thinking long term is so important on this.
And from the execution perspective, a piece that struck everybody is the cohesiveness and coherence of the broad economic agenda and the team. Because as you say, what you're describing is something that needs multiple moving parts to work together. I think you've earned the confidence of the markets and the private sector because of the cohesiveness that's come together. And it's as you say, it's a critical part. Yeah.
Perfect. That's why when you say this statization, this word is so beautiful. It works for everything.
Yes.
Even for that, because imagine this guy's example. In a hypothesis, one, you are doing that inside of the government, just with some ministers that are working.
Yeah.
Two, is BNDES together with Petrobras, Total, Shell, Equinor. Even 4 years from now, if someone changes their mind, we'll be much more protected as a society. So desestatizating the country planning as well is very helpful for all of us as a society. Yeah. It protects us from changing, shifting minds.
Now, shifting tax more to the international arena as we sit here in the US, and we've talked about the US and Brazilian relationship. What are the international priorities for BNDES, and how can BNDES strengthen the relationship between the two countries?
It's a very broad question, but I'll start in parts.
The headlines.
Yeah, headlines. But first, let me start with the lending. One of the bottlenecks for foreign investors in Brazil was not having the corporate guarantee.
Yeah.
Because if I don't accept project finance risk, I need the corporate guarantee. You are based in whatever, Atlanta, New York, or Europe, you don't have it, right? So we crowd out these foreign investors. Once we look at more at the project, we make things even.
Yeah.
So taking more project risk and not just the corporate one, I'm making more able for outsiders to come to Brazil. That's one side. On the second part, with the investment banking, is again, since we will be the investment bank for the Brazilian state, we need to be speaking to investors. We need to be traveling around the world, receiving people in Brazil, bringing them to the interior of Mato Grosso, Amazonas. We need to do that. And in the Brazilian state, there's no better institution to do that other than BNDES. Of course, you have all the export, the Comércio Exterior Minister, you have the Itamaraty, you have several political institutions that are crucial as well. But on a financial, let's say, a business perspective, I think we're quite well positioned to do that. Yeah. And we're preparing the bank to work with this investor relation base, which is nothing new, right? All the bankers here, they do that. But it's just taking this public machine with a lot of intelligent people, with a deep knowledge of Brazil, and please speak to the foreign investors.
Yeah.
And speak about this country specifically, since we're here, the US Chamber. I think, again, we are agnostic about who and where to trade. We want serious people, serious money, and money that's there not just for the financial return, but also to help our country. Yep. We value a lot the investor that will be there investing for the purpose of having a better country, together with the financial returns. They're both equally important. But we're agnostic about the origin. However, culturally wise, time zone, distance, immigration, there is no better country than this one to trade with Brazil. In the developing world, it's hard to see a Brazilian speaking with Asians or even European. I live in London, so I say that with some knowledge. Yeah. And I think the country that's most linked culture to our country is US, no doubt about that. So by nature, there will be a facilitation. It's a competitive advantage that I think this country should use in its favor in order to, I would say, invest and be in Brazil.
Yeah, and that then also, as you say, it's almost the role model and the model from BNDES as an example for other parts of the economy and some of the private sector to follow in your stead
Yes.
in opening up the economy. One final question, and more of a personal one. So imagine it is 7 years' time, 8 years' time.
7.
9, whatever you want it to be. What do you want your legacy to have been at BNDES from a very personal perspective?
Okay, I think I would say, especially because I'm a technical guy, so I cannot skip the technical part. I think I would say 3 things. On the financial side, I would say the balance sheet of the bank. I think we should end this 2022 with a much more conservative balance sheet, right? It doesn't make any sense to be an equity speculative trader being a development bank. So I would like to end at December 2022 with almost no speculative book and a much more efficient balance sheet. If you look at today, we're finished September with 110 billion reais in cash and 120 billion reais with listed equity.
Yep.
It's so inefficient. So the more we bring this balance sheet to be lending directed and more efficient, smart, I would say, efficiency, the better for the bank. And the less the bank rely on public money, the better for the government and better for the bank. So again, on this financial aspect, I would like to leave the bank in 2022 with this much more solid, conservative, and protected, as a development bank should be, right?
Yep.
On the second one's on an operational perspective, I love this machine to be up and running on a full speed on this purpose of the service bank, of having an open BNDES. Again, on the credit side, having the syndication up and running at, I would say, decent speed, so opening our books and our execution to bring more players to lend along us. And on the investment banking side, having a, I would say, AAA notch service provided to our government in Brazil.
Yeah.
Having this investment banking arm moving at full speed. It takes time, of course, but I think 3 years is more than enough to get there. But having this banking cover all levels of Brazil, federal, state, and municipal, at decent quality value added for them.
Yeah.
That's the second. And the third one, Jane, I think that's the most challenging, but the most important is the culture one, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And if you change the balance sheet and we change the machine, times can rechange that again. But if you change the culture of the bank, that's something that's hard to challenge, right? And going back to my history again from the last 15 years of the bank and how the culture was affected. If you are this, I would say, machine lender, and you are focused on profits, and the bank was stimulated to make profits, because just a separate note here, I didn't mention. When the government capitalized the bank with the subsidized lending, it didn't account the fiscal results, but all the dividends and income taxes, it was primary results.
Yeah.
So the government pushed the bank to be this lending machine with huge profit. And people were doing that for 15 years. And I think that we as a bank, we forgot our purpose, right? And my view, my goal as a cultural goal is to remember people why this bank is here. This bank as a development bank should be here thinking firstly on the non-financial aspects of the activity. How does that improve our country? We need to have less children dying because we have water treatment. We must have less people being robbed because we have lights on the streets. You must have less pollution in Amazonia because now we have solar generation. So I want the bank to think firstly on how we change the country. How do we improve people's life in Brazil? And then we change how much is our profit, how do we pay our bills. And if you look at the bylaws when the bank was founded, was written there. The bank is here to do this, this, and this. And maybe we didn't have such a great time in the world where you have now technology, we have financial tools, you have abilities to deal globally. And then maybe now is the time where the bank can truly execute its purpose. And my goal in the cultural side is to make the staff there and people understand that that's why we're here. It's not for the profit. And then once you click this button on people, and we have a fantastic team, fantastically qualified, and quite impressive. But if we can shift there, and if we can plant these roots of the cultural change, I'm quite sure that 4 years from now, no one will be able to revert it back for being just a pure financial lender.
Then you'll just have to keep going for another 4 years afterwards.
Maybe. Too far from that.
Thank you very much indeed. I think for all of us, it's just a breath of fresh air to hear the agenda that you have, but much more than that, it's exciting. You can see the difference that BNDES is going to make to the country. And I think we count on us all to try and help and do what we can, but also good luck. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you,
Montezano.